Johnny the Bug Stopelli was a diehard and dangerous mafioso who once had his prison sentence commuted by President Harry Truman. He also was involved in the suicide of a beautiful showgirl from Butte, Montana. But although he was little known to the general public, Johnny the Bug was a pivotal and important figure in the New York City gangland. This is his story. Innocenzio Johnny the Bug Stopelli, also known as John Stopelli, was born on April 10, 1907 in Greenwich Village in New York City. He lived for years in the 4th Ward section down near the docks. There was a period during the 1940s when he had relocated up to the Bronx, but primarily he was a downtown Manhattan guy all his life. Although by his mid-60s he moved a bit further uptown to the more prestigious address of 200 East 36th Street by the late 1970s and 35 East 38th Street by 1983, where he lived for the rest of his life. Stopelli lived a few doors down from his lifelong associate and capo Tony Bender-Strollo. John Stopelli was a notorious member in the downtown regime of Vito Genovese, under the auspices of capo regime and later underboss the aforementioned Tony Bender-Strollo. Stopelli was first documented as an inducted soldier when informant Joe Valachi identified him during the famed Valachi hearings in 1963. He was also subsequently named in both the 1983 and 1988 U.S. Senate hearings on organized crime. Johnny the Bug headed his own drug crew that distributed kilo lots of heroin the Genovese family smuggled in from Europe. The crew operated for decades. Stopelli was considered one of the most active wholesale traffickers in the United States by the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, or FBN, who had pegged him as a top drug trafficker by the 1930s. Beyond handling narcotics per se, Stopelli was also considered to be one of the overall bosses of their regime, a highly trusted inner circle member in league with Strollo. Johnny the Bug's operating territory, stomping grounds, and hangouts were always in the Greenwich Village section of the Lower West Side along Prince Sullivan, Bleecker, and 3rd Streets. His favorite haunts included Milady's Tavern and Tony Pastor's Club. He was alleged to be a hidden partner of Tommy Anachirico in the ownership of DiMartino's Bar on Bleecker Street. Stopelli reportedly used this as a base for various racket operations. He numbered among his associates Vito Genovese, the family boss who counted Stopelli and his Greenwich Village regime as his personal crew, allowing them to handle various narcotic shipments and other sensitive assignments. The aforementioned Anthony Tony Bender-Strollo, a top capo regime under Genovese, who later rose to acting boss before he disappeared. He was Stopelli's primary capo for years. Thomas Tommy Ryan Ebele, a soldier in Strollo's crew who later rose up to an acting boss position. Pasquale Patsy Ryan Ebele, Tommy's brother who Stopelli may have later served under after Strollo's disappearance and presumed murder. Alfred Butch Faico, a fellow Greenwich Village regime member and neighborhood friend. Vincent Bruno Moro, a younger associate who Stopelli was said to have brought around and later groomed. Moro was said to have been a vicious killer. Stopelli was said to have been the sponsor of Vincent Moro for membership into the Brigada. Attilio Frank the Bug Caruso, a soldier in the 4th Ward regime who also dealt in heroin. He was arrested in 1945 with Stopelli for narcotics. He was also later arrested in Europe for narcotics smuggling. Joseph Jobeck Lappy, another soldier of the 4th Ward who would later rise to head that faction. He was a convicted trafficker and waterfront racketeer. Charles Charlie Bullets Albero, a notorious narcotics dealer who headed an extensive heroin ring based in East Harlem. Joe Valachi, East Harlem-based soldier and fellow regime member who was later arrested with Stopelli for narcotics, and of course later he became an informant. Philip Philly Katz Albanese, another key soldier in the downtown regime convicted of narcotics. He helped run waterfront rackets. And Girolamo Bobby Doyle Santuccio, a notorious gunman, soldier, and crew member from Greenwich Village, who later relocated up to Connecticut. When Stopelli was in his early teens, he was arrested by Queens police after he stole a flock of homing pigeons from a pigeon coop in the Long Island City section of New York. In 1926, when he was only 19, he was arrested for having formed a stick-up and robbery crew. When questioned by detectives, Stopelli admitted he was the crew's leader and that he had been living off the proceeds of the holdups. In that same year, Stopelli was arrested for the murder of another young local hoodlum named Louis Bernardo. Bernardo had been murdered in October 1925 inside a pool hall in the Greenwich Village area. His partner in the arrest, Peter Sonamo, would later plead guilty to the killing and was sent away for life. Stopelli was charged with burglary. In 1938, Stopelli was questioned for several hours about the death of a beautiful showgirl named Thelma Giroux. Giroux had only a few years earlier made her way to New York City from her hometown of Butte, Montana, seeking stardom. She and Johnny the Bug had been dating for about 2 years, but they had broken up, and so she went to Chicago to work at the 606 Club. The 606 Club has a bit of an interesting history that I want to share with you. It was a swank burlesque joint that handed out matchbooks to its patrons, featuring covers showing topless women in stiletto heels prancing around with bubbles. The Chicago Tribune reports that the 606 was also the name of a treatment for venereal disease. Conventioner nightclub guides reportedly printed ads for clinics offering confidential 606 cure treatments. The 606 Club was eventually torn down and the property is now a park. Now back to the story. Giroux had just recently returned to New York City where she and Stopelli reacquainted themselves with each other. On the evening of April 18, 1938, Thelma plunged to her death after either jumping out of or being thrown out of a fifth-story window of a Times Square honky-tonk residence named the Lincoln Hotel. This happened soon after the couple had returned to the hotel after a big night out on the town. Stopelli told homicide detectives 2 different stories. One was that he had left the room and then returned to find Thelma gone and the window wide open. His other story was that he was just coming out of the bathroom when he saw her standing naked on the ledge. "I was coming out of the bathroom when she did it," he told the cops. "She just waved her hand, yelled, 'I'm sick and tired of it all. Goodbye, so long, it's all over.' And then she went out the window." Stopelli was never charged with her death since the police couldn't prove that he had anything to do with it. Cops learned later that she owed a huge hotel bill, $49 at the time, and was looking for a job, but that she also had a deed to a cemetery plot in her effects. Her death was ruled a suicide. In March of 1945, Stopelli was one of 17 members of a huge narcotics ring operating in New York and Washington, D.C. They were accused of moving $4 million worth of marijuana, morphine, opium, and heroin over a 4-year span. In November 1945, he was also arrested with Vinnie Morrow for the murder of an ex-convict named Rocco Loscalzo. Loscalzo, who was out on bail after being charged with robbing a warehouse of $20,000 in liquor, was shot to death as he was walking down Sullivan Street in Greenwich Village. Coincidentally, Loscalzo was last seen alive at DiMartino's bar, the same bar Stopelli had a hidden ownership in with Tommy Anachirico, who was also called in as a material witness. Police had found Morrow hours after the shooting wearing blood-stained clothing, but he denied he had anything to do with the shooting. A 9-state alarm was issued for Stopelli's arrest in order to question him about the murder. It was believed Loscalzo was killed because he was going to squeal about the warehouse robbery. Eventually, the charges against Morrow were dismissed for lack of evidence. In October 1948, Stopelli was one of 5 mob guys arrested for a California to New York City heroin smuggling network. The FBN accused the Genovese family-led conspirators of having brought the narcotics in from Mexico for ultimate distribution around San Francisco, California, and on the East Coast, specifically the New York tri-state area. Stopelli was arrested in New York after his fingerprints were allegedly found on a package of heroin sold to undercover agents in an Oakland, California hotel room. Johnny the Bug was convicted in 1949 in a San Francisco court and sentenced to a 6-year federal prison term. In late 1950, shortly before he was set to begin that 6-year term in the San Francisco drug case, Stopelli almost bought the farm himself when he was accosted by a hoodlum named Sam Urquhart in the wee hours of the morning inside the Milady Tavern. The story goes that Urquhart, well known in the neighborhood as a nasty and violent hood, just swaggered into this notorious mob hangout and started threatening everybody in the bar. He was well acquainted with Stopelli, and the Bug was alleged to have told him to get lost, chasing him out. Urquhart was said to have left, but returned shortly thereafter with a .32 caliber revolver and promptly shot Stopelli in the back when he wasn't looking. Then he immediately ran out of the bar with other patrons chasing him. a half a dozen buddies of Stopelli caught up to him a few doors down on Prince Street and beat him with steel garbage pails, cracking and badly fracturing his skull. Both men were in grave condition when they arrived at St. Vincent's Hospital, but they both survived. Stopelli had been fighting his 1949 drug conviction in San Francisco and proclaiming his innocence from the moment he was arrested. Johnny the Bug claimed the sole fingerprint on that package of heroin was not his, and that he had been set up by narcotics agents. In 1950, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals upheld Stopelli's conviction. In 1951, his lawyer submitted a motion for a new trial based on newly discovered evidence that proved Stopelli was innocent. The government fought it tooth and nail, telling the court the new evidence wasn't new at all, but just conflicting. His motion was denied. As it turns out, the testimony by the government's star witness, a fingerprint expert who swore on a Bible that the fingerprints were a perfect match with Stopelli's, and which was the sole evidence that won his conviction, was all a lie. The FBI itself had determined later that the fingerprint found on that package actually belonged to someone else. In 1952, after serving almost 3 years in jail, President Harry Truman interceded and commuted Stopelli's sentence, without ever implicating or accusing the FBI and FBI agents with wrongdoing, of course. President Truman had been made aware of the case by several influential defense lawyers and friendly, sympathetic politicians. Johnny the Bug got very lucky despite having already served almost half his sentence. With the killing of Tony Bender in 1962 and the death of Vito Genovese 7 years later in 1969, Stopelli slowly faded into the mob's version of retirement. He was already in his mid-60s and retired from heavy racket activities of earlier years, but he was still somewhat active, albeit in a much more admittedly mundane and docile racket. In 1977, he was among a large group of Genovese-oriented gamblers picked up for operating a combination multi-million-dollar numbers and sports bookmaking ring in the New York, New Jersey areas. It was allegedly headed by Genovese captain Vincent Jimmy Napoli. Stopelli was charged with promoting gambling and gambling conspiracy, with authorities alleging that Stopelli and Napoli had been partners in the betting operation. Although it was a major gambling bust at the time, it's unclear whether Johnny the Bug was convicted or served any jail time if he was. Napoli was sentenced to a 5-year jail term on his conviction after trial. This charge was Stopelli's swan song. He was already pushing 70 years old. No more was publicly heard from him until his death on January 10, 1993. He was 86 years old. Innocenzio Stopelli, or more aptly known as Johnny the Bug, was one of the early Italian underworld's top workers. A die-hard, dangerous mafioso who, although little known to the general public, was a pivotal and important figure in New York City gangland. And that's the end of our story about Johnny the Bug Stopelli. We hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. And visit us at Button Guys of the New York Mafia at www.thenewyorkmafia.com to read more stories like this one. Thank you for watching. Until next time.